So, hello and welcome to the Sacred Wisdom Podcast. I'm joined with Stephen Denman again today, my brother, and we will be talking about the ancient aliens, which is a chapter within Mysterious Realities. We have chatted about aliens for years, and we believe that there have been alien visitations to this planet many, many times before. And we're going to discuss on that subject today. So, welcome, Stephen Denman. Thank you for coming along.
Hello, Zach.
Hope you're well, Steve. Tell us more about the ancient aliens and what has been on this planet.
Well, I mean, the presence of, firstly, we have to say a lot of the extraterrestrials can be defined as ultra-terrestrial. So it means they're not just coming from planets and moons beyond our solar system, but in this physical galaxy. They are perhaps a lot of the time actually traveling for long periods beyond or outside of space-time, and may have come from parallel dimensions, a parallel level of realities, or parallel universes. And they are highly bioetheric, meaning they're not exactly corporeal as we would look at, say, human beings. That's the first point. The second point is that I would say the presence on this planet of extraterrestrials goes back around 250,000 years BC. Wow. And this would go back really to the inception and the arrival of what's become known as the Rigelian Greys, or the Orion Greys, or tall Greys, from what has become known also as the planet Greater, which orbits Rigel A, which is a bluish supergiant stellar mass in the Orion constellation, and the shorter Zeta Reticulum Type A and Type B Greys that are almost like biological drones. They're just servants, basically, for the tall Greys, the Rigelian Greys. Now, they've been coming and going from this planet, as I've said, since around 250,000 years BC, which means they were on this planet during the existence of both the Lemurian continent and the Atlantean continent and the islands of Atlantis.
When did alien abductions start happening?
Well, I mean, if you go back looking at world folklore and you look at, Irish Celtic folklore or Welsh folklore, and the various kinds of European folklore, and the interaction of fairies and fairy rings and human beings, especially people who were farmers or people generally that lived, who were pagans, who lived out in the countryside, the more remote geographic areas. These could have been actually not just, shall we say, bioetheric humanoids from the hollow earth. They may well have been actual extraterrestrials, such as the Zeta Reticulum Type A and B Greys, carrying out alien abductions. So you're going back to periods, maybe even into the Paleolithic, Paleolithic age goes to around 50,000 BC. And then you have the Mesolithic age and then the Neolithic age, which are much more recent. So let's put it this way, for thousands and thousands of years, there has more than likely been some level of alien abduction going on.
So you mentioned the Greater aliens from the planet Greater. So just so people may have heard that name before, and it comes from the Greater Treaty, doesn't it? Which happened in 1954 by President Dwight Eisenhower. Just talk a little bit about that, Steve, because that's a very interesting interaction. Obviously, you had all these crash UFOs within the 40s, and then you had in the 50s, you had this meeting, development of technology as well, surge of technology, transistor radio, all this stuff.
That's right.
Created post 54. So tell us about, what do you think happened at this meeting with President Dwight Eisenhower and the supposed alien Greys or Rigelian Greys?
What we know is that at the Muroc Army Airfield on the 20th of February 1954, there was that meeting that took place. But we know that around, I think it was 2 weeks, 14 days prior to that, so somewhere around the 6th or the 7th of February 1954, there had been an initial meeting with what are known as these Nordic aliens or Pleiadians or Nordic Aryan type extraterrestrials, who had met with US President David Dwight Eisenhower and had said...
And this was previous to that meeting?
That is correct. And it was believed...
Okay, interesting.
It was believed it was possibly at Muroc Army Airfield, although the details on that are rather sketchy, but it is rumored, purported that it did take place in the same location. And it was basically a situation where what the elites were going to be offered by these Nordic Pleiadian type extraterrestrials wasn't conducive to their control structure, how they wanted to continue controlling and regulating human beings and therefore human consciousness. So that meeting was a failure. It didn't go ahead. There wasn't a formal agreement that was established. And then on the 20th of February 1954, there was this other much more well-known about meeting that became known as the Greada Treaty with the Rigelian Greys or Orion Greys, who are over 7 feet tall, some say even 7 foot and 6 inches in height, with these very pallid, ashened complexions, greyish looking, completely hairless, large oval-shaped black eyes. And they landed. There was thousands of cameras that were filming the event that day on the 20th of February 1954.
And where would you have we ever seen any of that video footage? Not one.
I mean, that was a lot of. It's so much disinformation and blurring that's going on with people using CGI and sort of messing around on the internet. As we know, it's been a major, especially like UFO sightings, the same problem. So what we know is this meeting, what came out of the meeting was that the agreement stated that these tall greys would be allowed to start commencing a formal alien abduction program of a set number of American citizens that were listed, their first names, surnames, their addresses, and those details had to be kept with the US federal government, with the US, shall we say, United States Armed Forces, so they would know which Americans were being abducted. They had to be returned, but DNA and blood samples were allowed to be taken in exchange for a steady flow of sequenced and released occult technology from the Rigelian Greys to the military-industrial complex. And we know of the end of that Greada Treaty on the 20th of February 1954, that by October of 1954, the first deep underground military base was being constructed. Yes, smaller underground or subterranean installations had been constructed specifically by the US federal government even before World War II, before 1939, but these were not
very extensive.
Yeah, they weren't massive city-sized advanced bases. They weren't interconnected with the maglev, magnetic levitation train shuttles. These were all back off the technologies that came from the Rigelian Greys. So there was a lot going on back then. We also know the first rudimentary introduction of what became known as artificial intelligence, or AI, was also introduced into the military-industrial complex by October 1954 and installed within that very first deep underground military base, or D1 base.
So you got to remember, as people have to remember the progression there as well, because you had Arthur C. Clarke's novels as well produced at that time, and then in the 60s, you obviously we traveled to the moon apparently, so all this kind of stuff. So we had a lot of space technology developed at that time. Very interesting sort of transition. So do you think that the program was achieved? Do you think they actually achieved what they needed to achieve? Because when we go to what you're saying about abductions, is that they seem to have stopped the abductions at the moment, right?
I'd say so. I think in terms of a sort of a loose parameter or timeline on the alien abduction phenomena, as I said a bit earlier on in our discussion about what was happening going back to even 250,000 years BC, there's always been a steady number of abductions, again blurred and symbolically represented in these fairy tales, stories of supernatural entities, supernatural beings, how they were described, how people were feeling during the medieval period, how they felt about what they were seeing, but not really understanding that they perhaps were extraterrestrial. But the formalization of that into a whole scale, almost an industrialized level of alien abduction started, I believe, around the 20th of February 1954. And that lasted up until, I think, the end of April 2000, around the 30th of April 2008. There may well have been a small number of abductions, but the number of them drastically dropped after the end of April 2008 by people, and people undergoing regressive hypnotherapy. And we're talking thousands and thousands of clients are going to see these properly qualified clinical hypnotherapists and no longer describing under aggressive hypnotherapy having these traumatic experiences of alien abduction, a bit like Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, about his abduction by the Greys.
You've got so many tribes around the world and people that have interacted with this and talk about the Aboriginals. You've got the Dogon tribe who talk about the Sirius star system, and there's all this connection to the stars that is constantly throughout history. So there seems to be a knowledge base. There's some information's come from them stars.
Yeah.
So do you think it was always the grey alien? Because always that's become a stereotypical type of alien. But as you said, I believe that as well. They are the servants to some other race of being. Yeah. What do you think is controlling these greys?
Well, we know from a lot of the research that has been done generally into the UFO phenomena, we know that there's what has been given as a phrase, the Orion Confederation, which is ruled and supervised by the Rigelian Greys or the Orion Greys, but they above them in terms of a hierarchical line of command is what is known as the Alpha Draconians. These are reptilian humanoids or hominids. They're bipedal, basically. They're upright, kind of lizard-like extraterrestrials, and they're highly bioetheric, so they're able to literally fade in and out of this 3D holographic reality using their just at will, using their own volition. I'd say there is I think the hierarchy above that could include the golden mantids. These are these kind of giant insectoid type beings, which are extremely psychic, very, very psychic and telepathic. But I think regardless of the hierarchical aspects, what I feel is it's all part on a wider level of the spiritual learning of human beings, and that most people cannot envisage, or even for a few seconds, how vast and internecine the entire alien abduction phenomena really is, what it really is about, what the actual long-term, shall we say, intergalactic agenda of this. Why would one group of so-called malevolent extraterrestrials, if that's what they are, come here, be extracting, the DNA and blood samples from statistics that have been compiled just in the United States of America? It is believed at least 60 million to 70 million Americans since that time in 1954 have actually experienced alien abduction phenomena.
And not conscious to it, actually.
Oh, no, we know because the grey, the Zeta Reticulum type A and B greys, they are experts at masking the subconscious mind using archetypes such as the symbol of the owl, for example, because the owl is connected to alien abduction phenomena.
Where does the owl come from? We know that symbol, don't we?
Yeah, well, the owl is an extremely, as the Celts and the Celtic tribes from Ireland and Scotland, the Welsh Cymric tribes, and the Gaulish Celtic tribes of France and parts of Germany, their view on the owl was that it was an astral entity in a more corporeal form, that its eyes were literally portals that linked both the astral plane and the material world. So, there's many people that have purported that the owl, in Greek folklore, the owl was always seen as a very powerful symbol. Obviously, it was one of the flags of Great Tartaria in northern Russia. So we know it represents occult knowledge, perhaps occult technology. It represents the astral keeper of arcane secrets. So there is a lot of interweaving symbolism not fully understood that probably does perhaps on some level connect to aliens such as the Zeta Reticulum type A and type B greys, ultimately the Rigelian greys.
On our doorstep, only actually probably about 150 miles from us. And we probably will do a visit there one day and actually go and have a little explore. But we have the famous Rendlesham Forest incident, which was classed as the British Roswell. And a lot of people don't realize how big this event was.
Yeah.
And this was over a 2-day period. And there was 2 military bases, wasn't there? Let's discuss a little bit about that. And I visited there a few times, and it is bizarre, strange place. We've gone there, haven't we?
Yeah, you travelled up to that part of Suffolk and in East Anglia, and I know you did some filming there, and you had some very unusual supernatural experiences with the trees. You said there was definitely quite an otherworldly frequency and vibration.
100%. And just
that.
interestingly, I just remembered actually, only a few months ago, I was staying in a place that looked over Rendlesham Forest, and we could actually go up high, and we were looking out, and there was all these military helicopters, like Chinooks, two Chinooks flying up and down. And I'm not saying they were looking for something. They could have been doing a training exercise, but it was just really bizarre in this quiet English countryside location. And you had these Chinooks flying up and down over the wood.
Yeah.
There were some very bizarre things, but like what happened, it was in 1980. Am I correct?
That's right. It happened it was from the 25th of December, 1980 through to, I think, the 27th of December, but it was over 3 days, but roughly it was kind of in between those. There was events on 2 nights that went on that into the early morning, I think, of the 27th of December 1980. And so you had 2 RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, and in between them, nestled in between those 2 RAF bases was Rendlesham Forest. Both of those RAF bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, were seconded to the United States Air Force at the time. Right. And the bases, there was missile silos with proper ICBM nuclear missiles stored for nuclear material. And that seemed to be what the main interest of the UFO or UFOs, and therefore the extraterrestrial pilots on board who were hovering, and beams of light were coming down over those nuclear ICBM silos. But what is also known is that the North Sea region, if you go out across that part of Suffolk and East Anglia, out into the North Sea, fishermen as well as naval vessels there's been an exponentially large increase over the last 20 to 30 years in sightings of orange orbs or orange spherical shaped UFO spacecraft seen coming from the North Sea and coming inland over parts of Norfolk and Suffolk and East Anglia. So is there an interconnection with the geomagnetic ley lines? I would say yes. Are there dimensional portals there? I would say more than likely. Is there some kind of ethereal based aquatic alien base of some nature in the North Sea? Possibly, but again, it cannot be confirmed either. But we know there's a lot of activity. And when you said it's the British Roswell, I personally myself, going back to July 1947, the Roswell UFO incident, it was a weather balloon, which obviously it wasn't a weather balloon. That was the story that was made up after the actual retrieval had taken place for the newspapers. But what we know is, when we look at the amount of personnel, the RAF bases that were seconded to these US airmen, there was hundreds of US Air Force personnel involved in that whole incident between the 25th to the 27th of December 1980. There were so many eyewitnesses to what was going on, to the alien spacecraft weaving its way slowly at one point amongst the trees in Rendlesham Forest. Contact was made.
Well, the Rendlesham Forest, sorry to interject, but the Rendlesham Forest, the 2 witnesses that witnessed the UFO craft, it actually went to the actual base, where the nuclear arms were, and it actually it examined, it scanned the light over the actual supposed hut or wherever they were stored. After they looking at this nuclear arms, the witnesses discovered there were certain glyphs on the actual craft itself, and somehow they've recorded these glyphs or remembered what they were, and the actual translation they came to was it was 6668100, and the exploration of humanity. Continuous for planetary advancement, there with a question mark. They weren't sure how to translate that. I don't think people realize that, but the fact that nuclear arms even exist in our human world, you have to get a grip of that, because it is absolutely insane. The destruction they cause, and the technology and the intelligence to create these kind of bombs. People need to understand that this is absolutely insane that we even have them in the first place in society.
Absolutely. And I think the individual's name was Sergeant James Penniston, also known as Jim Penniston, who was one of the Air Force airmen who purportedly touched the actual metallic structure of this UFO
Wow.
that was literally hovering in Rendlesham Forest. And then he later recalled a kind of almost like a psychic download of all these coordinates. And we have to remember that one of the coordinates was apparently for where the civilization of Atlantis was once located in the Atlantic
Yes.
Ocean.
Yeah.
And this
That's
is
amazing.
I mean, this has led to this whole concept of, were these time traveling extraterrestrials who come back in time? But then I would say, well, if that's this is my logical reasoning here. If that was the case, why would they need to come back and check a bunch of nuclear ICBM silos, an RAF base next to Rendlesham Forest in that area of East Anglia? Why wouldn't they use that time traveling occult technology to go and check the Atlantic Ocean itself? If they can hover through the air, they can probably dive underwater quite easily. So that's interesting in itself. Was that about, again, this is just me putting a question there, was there some connection to geomagnetic ley line coordinates and alignments with that area of East Anglia and Atlantis and various other, there's a lot of other key locations on that download, because a lot of coordinates were given. It wasn't just
I mean, I'm sure we're only given a fraction of what was said.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot more information, but it's absolutely fascinating. And
It is, yeah.
there is no doubt that the aliens exist, but we need to understand that these are interacting with us on levels, and maybe sometimes levels we don't understand, and maybe levels we can't see. We've got to understand we're only seeing 2% of this spectrum. So we're seeing a very narrow bandwidth of what is actually there. You can't see Wi-Fi signals. You can't see this stuff flying through the air. You don't see this conversation we're having. This is a video format put into a digital set of sequences that is sent to you and then retranslated back into a video format. So understand how information travels, and there could be beings watching us now. And I would say so. I from my own experience, personal experience, and I know Stephen has had many, many, many sightings of things, especially around the Thames estuary, around that way. If we were living amongst an alien race anyway, it's highly unlikely anybody would actually know about it. This is the thing. A lot of people have this concept that aliens would just appear and walk around in the street as normal. We may very well have beings walking amongst us without us being aware to them. It's very possible that. What do you feel on that, Steve?
Well, I mean, you just take a look at, pick which episode of the X-Files you wish.
Yeah.
You look at, FBI special agent, Fox Mulder and Dana Scully, this in partnership going round, and half the time, many of the so-called extraterrestrials are, you can't tell them apart. They're incognito unless they make their move. They produce some kind of advanced occult technology, or a giant UFO appears and they go on board with some, sort of human beings they've captured or whatever. Yeah, it's very difficult. We know that one of the things that came off the alien abduction phenomena is hybrids, genetic hybridization. And there's been many books written on this subject, that apparently one of the agendas of the Rigelian Greys or Orion Greys and their biological automatons, these little Zeta Reticulum type A and B Greys, running around, and from 1954 up until at least to 2000, maybe a bit after that, but it did rapidly diminish, as I mentioned earlier. And what we have to remember is they seem to have some sort of obsession with taking DNA from Homo sapiens and creating some kind of merger with the DNA from themselves to create hybrids that had large, wide faces, large oval-shaped eyes with blue irises usually, or green irises, and wispy blonde hair. Now, the question is, what were they trying to do? Were they genetically trying to restore themselves? Were they trying to genetically save their race from some kind of long-term biological destruction? That's never really been confirmed, but we know that if a group of extraterrestrials is working towards creating that genetic hybridization, eventually over many months and years of persistently doing that, they're probably going to create the right genetic and DNA balance, so that individual looks and talks and walks like a Homo sapien. And if you then have a kind of a dumbed down society with fluoridated water and millions upon millions,
you could quite easily put something like that in society without anybody knowing.
And most would never detect it. I think only very psychic individuals who can really tune in would sense something's not right. I mean, the amount of reports that have been given from eyewitnesses of apparently beings that were either, reptilian hominids who suddenly would shimmer in front of them. And 1 minute they look like blue-eyed blondes, Aryan Nordic type human beings, like they came from like Norway or I know Sweden or somewhere, or maybe Germany, and the next minute suddenly they've got like a greenish scaly complexion. They've got vertical slit pupils, and they're standing there, nothing, and it's almost like a holographic overlay of some natures going on there. So it would be very difficult, I think, for 99% of people really to detect. Most people can't pick up if somebody, has been released from prison, for example, for committing a serious, crime. People don't. Most people aren't.
Most people are cut off. They're either in their smartphone. I think technology disconnects us from this a bit as well. I think if you're absorbed in technology, you're not going to be tuned into this.
No.
But Steve, one place I would really like to talk about, and although this has had lots of paranormal activity, there's also been lots of UFO sightings and also alien sightings. So one of it is Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
And this is in Utah, USA. It's absolutely fascinating area. And it actually goes back to being possibly it was the curse of the American Indians, the Navajo Indians, wasn't it?
It was the Ute, known as the Ute American Indians, or the Ute,
right?
Which is where the word Utah, the actual state of Utah in the United States, comes from. And the purported story is that the Navajos basically simplified
betrayed, isn't it? But
they sided with European settlers. It was connected to the U.S. cavalry. And they felt betrayed by what they thought were their Native American, tribal brothers and sisters.
And they cursed the land.
They cursed the Navajo as well as a tribe, a Native American tribe. And the Skinwalker is effectively a shapeshifter.
Yeah, just explain. So what goes on? Let's just talk a little bit about what goes on at Skinwalker Ranch. So it's been brought up now by a very wealthy individual who's actually documenting the area. So you can see lots of information online about this. But it's obviously being very hyped up when it gets into the mainstream media. But there is some very strange, eerie circumstances here. And so what do you think Skinwalker Ranch is, Steve?
Well, firstly, I mean, it was originally called the Sherman Ranch, and it's actually in what's called Uintah County in northeastern Utah, which is part of the Mountain West region. We know the Mountain West region in the western United States has large geomagnetic ley line convergences running straight the way through where the Sherman Ranch is. So I would say, simplify it down, that was originally a protected spiritual area of the Ute Indians going back hundreds of years. I believe they were astral guardians protecting that area from malevolent astral spirits from entering the material world. I think when European settlers then obviously moved in and took the land from them, literally they wouldn't have had any awareness of what was going on there. But I believe the military industrial complex is fully part of what's going on. We know there's deep underground military bases across that part of Utah. And we know that from many of the observations that have been made, huge numbers of UFOs have been seen appearing and disappearing, beams of light coming to the ground, hundreds of orbs of light, shadow people or shadow beings are appearing there with glowing red eyes and so forth. And even beings that we would class as werewolves have been seen.
Very strange.
Very strange. And lizard people, for want of a better phrase, have been seen flickering.
So the point I'm getting to, do you think these frequencies, obviously with the paranormal, UFOs, is it on the same frequency? Do you think ghosts, that kind of periphery energy that's just on the outside of our spectrum, isn't it?
I think we're in the visible light spectrum where, we're classed as highly condensed corporeal existences as Homo sapiens or human beings or whatever the phrase is these days. And, each person who is, I'd say, a true human being has a soul personality, not a genetic hybrid or an extraterrestrial with a hologram, resonating to disguise themselves. And I think we're here and we're in a really narrow, as you were mentioning, electromagnetic bandwidth. And I think the interconnectivity between what you class as fairies, elves, gnomes, dwarves, extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, UFOs, even things like skinwalkers, which, were once Native Americans who seem to be now kind of locked into some part of the lower astral in some way, and they themselves can flicker in and out of this 3D holographic reality. I think it's all very close in terms of frequency and vibration. All these different supernatural life forms and phenomena are very closely connected. Yes, I do.
Going back down to what I talk about a lot, what we both speak about is frequency and vibration. These things exist in this. So, it's really important that people understand that and actually really look at their own energies, look how they're interacting in the world. Obviously, the more disharmony there is in reality, these frequencies can intercept that and stuff like this. So, obviously, going back, as cheesy as people may feel it is, love is a frequency. Love is all there is. Actually, if you go into that vibration, none of these things are going to affect you.
That is so true. And I know a lot of people don't agree with the perspectives of Christianity, that kind of idea of biblical theology. But when it comes to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when you look at Yeshua ben Yosef, the Lord Jesus Christ, he wasn't going around. If you look at his ministry in Judea, what he was preaching was based on not identifying with the ego. So coming from a heart intelligence, not a mental intelligence or mind intelligence.
Yeah.
And that frequency, it's very interesting that when many people experience alien abduction, phenomena, or a late night activity, and that terrifies them. And say in the United States of America or Canada, there's a lot of devout Christians. They will, from a heart intelligence level, will cry out and say, words to the effect, many of which you can check online, the Lord Jesus Christ, help me, or they cry out, Jesus Christ, please help me, paraphrasing, what they're saying. And that seems to have an immediate frequency and vibrational change. It seems to prevent these abductions taking place. Now, how can Rigelian Greys or Orion Greys and their little biological automatons, these, the Zeta Reticulum type A and B Greys, they're running around, parking and levitating their UFOs somewhere nearby and then trying to abduct people. And then suddenly when they mention the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and they mean it in their heart.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that. Yeah.
And yet Christianity is consistently denigrated. It's sidelined by so many people.
It's been so distorted, religion, faith. It's been so, it's very, very bad. But, there is no doubt that prehistoric aliens existed and do still exist. I mean, like, you look at these images, you'll see them right now, and you can clearly see aliens interacting with UFOs and very strange looking type beings and large beings, small beings, all different shapes and sizes. These weren't just silly little playful pictures. They wanted us to remember this information. This is why we're here now.
You look at the petroglyphic carvings of the Anasazi Indians in the United States of America, and you can clearly see the scale of the Native Americans themselves. You can see lots of different imagery of birds and mammals, and then you can see what appear like alien spacecraft with these huge-looking, very tall extraterrestrials with these lines which represent beams of light radiating from their heads, or some sort of, maybe they're wearing a metallic spacesuit. Yeah. I mean, obviously this touches on the work of Eric von Daniken and, Chariot of the Gods.
Yeah.
Most famous book, it was an international bestseller. And there was many other authors around that time and some predecessors that had brought the ancient astronaut theory to public attention, but he really encapsulated it in his book, Chariot of the Gods. You go to Central America, parts of Mexico and Guatemala, or down into Brazil, and places like that, and all over other areas of South America. There are thousands of petroglyphic carvings,
Yeah.
on rocks that are outdoors in countryside areas, but also in lots of cavernous openings and tunneled areas where there's carvings showing UFOs and aliens. So and a lot of there was abductions definitely going on, going back even to the Paleolithic age around 50,000 BC or so.
So the question to ask there, as much as whatever people's beliefs are on this, whether or not they believe in this or not, is just ask yourself why this is ignored, why this information, this ancient information, archaeology is ignored. It's put to the sideline and almost like not considered to be real, or considered to be kind of a fairy tale. This is the reality we're living in. We have to understand that censorship that goes on and things pushed to the side. But Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because there is so much more we could discuss on this subject. But in the sense of it's huge. But tell me, is there anything else? Sorry, Steve.
Not really. I can't think of it because it's so internecine and it's so vast. If you start going into talking about one aspect, it interconnects usually to many others. And it is, to summarize it really clearly, two things here. Yes, the extraterrestrial presence on planet Earth is extremely long term. As I mentioned before, it goes back to at least 250,000 years BC. And yes, on some level, before the Greada Treaty was signed on the 20th of February 1954 in the United States of America, yes, there was some rudimentary level of alien abductions going on that mainly were described in different, fairy tales of world folklore.
But the point I'm really wanting to know, just let's finish on the positive. People need to understand that there's not just these type of dark beings around, that we don't see the other energies, the other beings that are existing, because they're not interacting on that level.
No. On one level, I do think they're part of a larger spiritual test for human beings. I think that if you look at what I would class as galactic federations and therefore intergalactic federations or galactic councils, I actually believe the Rigelian Greys or Orion Greys and the Zeta Reticulan Type A Greys, the Zeta Reticulan Type B Greys, they actually do serve a rather unique cause and effect, spiritual, and I'd say transdimensional purpose for human consciousness and spiritual development of human beings per se.
Oh, well, they're all in our creation spectrum, they're part of God, as much as they, whatever it is, that's part of what
part of the divine creation. Absolutely. And from one aspect, people may think it's malevolence, it's a breach of human rights and the dignity and the freedom of a human to be abducted. I actually will say this. I've said it before. I said there are no victims, only conscious or unconscious participants. And I believe that those types of extraterrestrials don't view human beings the way maybe humans would assume that they are going to be perceived by those extraterrestrials, if that makes sense. They are looking at them on a soul personality level prior to their existence in the incarnation on planet Earth in this time that they're here now, that some level of frequency and vibration, shall we say, interconnection was made, maybe previous lifetimes, where those people unconsciously would agree to be abducted, DNA and tissue samples extracted as part of a much wider, incredibly intricate incarnation process that spans way beyond planet Earth and this solar system. But again, it's so vast to comprehend that most people just could not envisage it. It's so mind-boggling, and for many people emotionally it would probably be quite overwhelming to even try and consider that level of, shall we say, transdimensional activity taking place.
We have been in, over a long period of time, people have kind of been sedated to some level, when it's kind of pushed their way of thinking about this subject to make it such a small little pocket of their brain to even consider this information. It's very, like you said, Steve, it's very hard for people to digest, but that it's important that people are aware that there are other, that this higher intelligence that's around us, or these beings that are around us, it's not all negative. There is actually a sort of positive journey that we can understand and learn from it. I just say this is number one why people need to be healthy, because you need to keep that mind clear and that state of being in a good place. Because if you're intoxicated in the body or in the mind, you'll actually find these things will, they'll attach to you, maybe in a different way, but negative situations, you are attracting everything in your life. And like Stephen said, we are conscious participants. We don't have to be unconscious to this world. We have to understand that we are creators of this world. We're not observers. We participate and create. And Steve, it's always fascinating. And I learn more and more. I think the more I talk with you, it's so interesting. I've known Stephen all my life, and yet literally even now, Stephen's got my brain thinking more, and the conversation is stimulating me to kind of think of other ideas. So brilliant, Steve. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, pretty much said everything I needed to say. It's been a great conversation as usual. We've covered a huge amount of information on the alien abduction phenomenon. I think it's been brilliant.
Excellent. And there is no doubt that there has been prehistoric aliens on this planet. And we can please go ahead and look at the Hidden History series. You can also purchase our book, Mysterious Realities, which is now available in paperback. And you can download an ebook on Amazon. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on. It is a bye from me. And
it's goodbye from me.